The Ottoman Empire. When you hear the name, what comes to mind? Magnificent palaces, world-conquering armies, vast territories. But what about the princes? What do you imagine about them? Living in gilded cages, enjoying a life of ease, heirs to the throne? You couldn't be more wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. In this video, we'll delve into why being an Ottoman prince was one of the most stressful, dangerous, and paranoid career paths in history. Because when they thought of family dinner, they were thinking poison test. Imagine a family that, on your birthday, essentially says, "Welcome." Now, what's expected of you is to both outshine your older brothers and avoid being murdered by your father. Being a son of Genghis Khan with the father conquering half the world and demanding you prove yourself might have sucked. But in the Ottoman Empire, there was the added potential of your own father having you strangled. It was a little more complicated. We'll chronologically explore the lives of these princes, from birth to ascension or death. Get ready, because you'll see how the phrase fratricide dominated every moment of their existence. The news spread through the Topkapi Palace like wildfire. A male child has been born. For the ordinary citizen, such an announcement would be cause for unbridled celebration. A new life welcomed into the world. But within the gilded walls of the Ottoman harem, these shouts of joy were laced with a chilling undercurrent of dread and fierce calculation. For a new prince, birth was not an entry into a loving family, but a sudden, inescapable conscription into the deadliest Game of Thrones history had ever devised. From the moment he drew his first breath, the infant prince was not merely a son. He was a contender, a potential future sultan, and therefore a rival. This inherent contradiction shaped every aspect of his existence. Imagine his mother, the concubine or Haseki Sultan, torn between profound, primal joy at having produced a male heir and the icy grip of fear for his and her future. Her heart would swell with pride, yet simultaneously constrict with terror. This newborn, her flesh and blood, was now a pawn, a prize, and a target in a ruthless political landscape. Her initial relief at having fulfilled her ultimate purpose, providing the Sultan with a son, would quickly be overshadowed by the understanding that her own survival and influence were now inextricably tied to this fragile, screaming bundle. Every lavish gift, every congratulatory visit, every whispered compliment would be scrutinized for hidden agendas. Was this a genuine expression of goodwill, or a subtle probe, a way to gauge her ambitions and identify her potential weaknesses? For the Sultan, the birth of another son was a complex affair. On one hand, it reinforced the strength and fertility of the dynasty, ensuring the continuation of his illustrious line. Each new prince was a testament to the longevity of the Ottoman house, a symbol of its enduring power. Yet, with each new son, the intricate web of succession grew more tangled, the potential for future conflict more acute. The very source of dynastic strength was also its greatest vulnerability. A sultan might gaze upon his newborn with paternal affection, but beneath that warmth lay the cold, hard calculus of imperial stability. Was this tiny heir a future pillar of the empire, or a potential source of devastating civil war, a sword poised to strike down his own brothers? The answer, he knew, would only be revealed in blood and time. So, was having a sultan for a father a blessing? Perhaps, for the empire. But for the individual prince, it was undeniably a curse, transforming him from a child into a perpetual target, a living embodiment of both hope and existential threat to the state. His cradle was less a sanctuary and more a starting line in a race where the losers often met a swift, silent end. The cage system. Once the initial fanfare surrounding a prince's birth subsided, his life settled into a rather peculiar rhythm. He wasn't exactly a prisoner, but neither was he truly free. His home was a specific, often lavish section of the palace designed to be both secure and isolating. It was a golden cage indeed, opulent, comfortable, yet utterly confining. Imagine growing up in a mansion where you have every luxury imaginable, the finest silks, exotic foods, an army of servants, but the only view you ever get is the meticulously manicured inner courtyard. Going outside to play meant carefully supervised excursions within the palace walls, never truly experiencing the bustling city that lay just beyond. My palace, my home, my prison might well have been their silent mantra, a darkly humorous summary of their gilded existence. Life in the harem, where these young princes spent their formative years, was a spectacle of bewildering complexity. It wasn't just a collection of women and children. It was a teeming, self-contained universe of power struggles, alliances, and betrayals. With scores of concubines, many of whom bore sons to the sultan, the harem was less a tranquil domestic space and more a political arena where the stakes were impossibly high. Imagine trying to keep track. Is that Aunt Fidan or Uncle Mehmed's mother's cousin's sister-in-law who definitely eyed my sweet cakes with suspicion last night? It was like a Game of Thrones, but with even more characters and the added chaos of toddlers running around. Determining who was whose son, who was allied with which faction of women, and whose influence was currently on the rise required a level of strategic insight that would make a modern political strategist weep. Every kind word, every small gift, every whispered secret could be a strategic maneuver in the ongoing, often subtle, war for the Sultan's favor in the future of their sons. And then there was the education. Oh, the education! From a tender age, princes were immersed in a rigorous curriculum. They learned swordsmanship, their small hands grappling with hilts that seemed impossibly large. They practiced horsemanship, mastering the art of riding before many could properly read. They delved into the intricacies of Islamic jurisprudence, poetry, mathematics, and various sciences, guided by the finest tutors the empire could procure. All these were essential skills for a future ruler, designed to forge a cultured and capable leader. But beneath the formal curriculum, there was an unwritten, yet far more crucial primary lesson: 50 Shades of Paranoid Survival. This was the true core of their education, taught not in textbooks, but through the subtle glances, the hushed conversations, the constant awareness of potential threats lurking everywhere. Every servant, every tutor, every cupbearer was a potential informer. Every lavish meal prepared by the finest palace chefs required a taste tester, not out of culinary curiosity, but out of a grim necessity to detect poison. Imagine trying to learn geometry while simultaneously assessing if your new calligraphy teacher might be a spy for your older brother's mother. Trust was a concept taught in theory but rarely practiced in reality. Everyone was a potential enemy, every kindness a potential trap. The opulent surroundings, the endless resources, the very title of prince itself served only to heighten the paranoia, reminding them that the higher you rose, the harder and swifter your fall could be. They were being groomed for greatness, yes, but also for a life lived under an unbearable, constant shadow of suspicion, governorship, and being left alone. For an Ottoman prince, the escape from the gilded cage of the palace often came in early adolescence, typically between the ages of 12 and 16, with an appointment as governor to a sanjak province. While this might sound like a thrilling promise of freedom for most young men, for the princes, this new assignment was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it meant a much-anticipated release from the suffocating atmosphere of the palace, away from the constant intrigues of their mothers and concubines, and a chance to taste the breath of the real world. Taking charge of a province with its own administrative structure and military forces offered them the opportunity to put their years of theoretical education into practice. It was a chance to prove themselves as commanders, as statesmen, much like they had envisioned in their dreams. However, this freedom simultaneously brought with it terrifying loneliness and danger. Being far from the imperial center of Istanbul, beyond the direct gaze of their father, meant becoming a living target. If spies lurked in every corner of the palace, now hundreds of kilometers away in their own sanjak, they were out of the Sultan's direct sight, but under the scrutiny of thousands of eyes. Sanjak Beyliği, or provincial governorship, was indeed a testing ground. Yet this testing ground was a minefield where the slightest mistake, the smallest misunderstanding, or even merely appearing too successful could have fatal consequences. As a Sanjak Bey, the young prince was entrusted with heavy responsibilities, commanding armies, leading campaigns when necessary, administering justice, collecting taxes, and ensuring the prosperity and order of his province. These were the fundamental duties expected of any leader. However, for a prince, the true test was to walk a tightrope while performing all these tasks. It was critical not to appear too powerful in his father's eyes, to avoid giving the impression that he was building his own army or network of supporters independent of the Sultan. A victory, a conquest, or an administrative success could bring not only praise but also suspicion. Success could trigger envy and whispers among his rivals at court, reaching the Sultan's ear as your son is building his own power base. This, in turn, could lead to a perception of threat in the Sultan's mind. Every achievement was also a risk factor. In the eyes of the public, the prince was a dual figure. On one hand, he was the future of the dynasty, a beacon of hope, the promise of a new beginning. He carried the Sultan's blood, a young, dynamic leader. The people of the province might hope for his justice, mercy, and the prosperity he could bring to the region. On the other hand, bitter past experiences had left deep marks in the public's consciousness. Every new prince provoked the question, will this one be like his father? Or will he engage in a bloody struggle with his brothers for the throne? Even as they embraced him, there was an underlying expectation, an anxiety that his fate might be tragic. Being sent to a sanjak was not merely a title. It was a challenge, a struggle for survival and leadership, but also a constant battle to stay alive. Becoming a statesman versus staying alive. The years a prince spent in his sanjak were not just an education in statesmanship. They were the ultimate test of the art of survival. The Ottoman bureaucracy was a labyrinthine, complex, enigmatic, and often deadly structure. When the young prince took over the administration of his province, he had to deal not only with the public and the military, but also with local judges, Kafes, beys, scholars, mudiris, and most importantly, officials appointed directly from Istanbul. Making a wrong move, signing off on an incorrect decision, or trusting the wrong person in this bureaucratic maze could cost him his career and even his life. These local power centers in the far-flung corners of the empire often acted in their own interests, attempting to draw the prince into their own games. Misinterpreting an imperial edict, making an error in a tax decision, or failing to resolve a local dispute could quickly be reported to Istanbul as Prince X cannot govern the province, or worse, Prince X is defying his father's orders. The bureaucracy, far from being a support network, was often a network of potential threats and reporting channels. Military campaigns were the most direct and visible way for princes to prove themselves. Commanding an expedition, conquering a fortress, or quelling a rebellion brought prestige in the eyes of the public and the army, and could earn the Sultan's favor. Every victory was proof of his military capabilities, an opportunity to display the qualities required of a future ruler. However, every victory was also a double-edged sword in the eyes of his father. While pride might be felt, the increasing power and popularity could simultaneously be perceived as a threat. Questions like, is he becoming too powerful? Is he perhaps building his own independent power base? Would begin to be whispered in the palace corridors. A prince's success in war could elevate him to both a hero and a potential adversary. Maintaining this delicate balance was like a tightrope walker's act. He could neither be too passive, lest he be seen as incompetent, nor too dazzling, lest he be perceived as a threat. And of course, the Sultan's eyes and ears were everywhere. In every sanjak around the prince, there were seemingly loyal servants, advisors, and local administrators. However, many of these individuals were directly loyal to Istanbul, reporting the prince's every step, every word, every decision instantly to the center. The Sultan's intelligence network, though lacking modern technology, possessed a rumor and reporting network that operated with astonishing speed. There might have been no telephones, but news traveled with remarkable velocity. Every breath the prince took, every gesture he made, every word he uttered was carefully recorded and interpreted. Prince X had a private meeting with such and such a vizier. Prince Y distributed more largesse to the army than expected. Prince Z defied orders from the palace. Each report would fit a piece into the puzzle in the Sultan's mind, forming a small part of a larger, complex picture. Living under such constant surveillance would exhaust a young man's spirit, forcing him to live in perpetual fear of making a wrong move. Even if the prince held absolute authority in his own sanjak, he was, in fact, bound by invisible shackles, knowing that he was constantly being watched by his father's omnipresent shadow. Sultan Mehmed II's Nizam-e-Alem. Principle. The words echo through the centuries, a chilling decree that defined the very essence of an Ottoman prince's existence. For the welfare of the state, Nizam-e-Alem, fratricide is permissible. These 12 words, formalized into law by Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror, after his conquest of Constantinople, were not merely a legalistic clause. They were a death sentence hanging perpetually over the head of every male member of the Ottoman dynasty. More than any battle, any political intrigue, or any foreign enemy, this single principle dictated the entire course of a prince's life. From his first breath in the harem to his last, often strangled, gasp, it stripped away any pretense of brotherly love, transforming sibling bonds into an existential threat. How did this one sentence dominate every moment of a prince's life? It instilled a paranoia so profound that it became a foundational element of their identity. Every interaction with a brother, every shared meal, every congratulatory nod from an advisor was filtered through the lens of potential betrayal and imminent death. The principle didn't just allow for fratricide, it enshrined it as a strategic necessity, a dark, immutable truth that underpinned the stability of one of history's most powerful empires. The logic behind this brutal law, at least from the perspective of the state, was undeniably pragmatic, albeit horrifyingly cold. The Ottomans, having witnessed the devastating civil wars that plagued earlier Turkish and Islamic states, and indeed their own early history, understood the chaos that rival claims to the throne could unleash. Multiple claimants meant fragmented power, internal strife, and ultimately, a weakened empire vulnerable to external enemies. Therefore, the Nizam-e-Alem principle aimed for absolute singular leadership. One sultan, one ultimate power. This was seen as the only guarantor of the empire's stability, its seamless transition of power, and its continued expansion. The cost? The lives of countless innocent princes sacrificed on the altar of imperial unity. It was a price deemed necessary for the welfare of the world order that the Ottoman state represented, the struggle for the throne and the risk of civil war. When a sultan died, the empire plunged into a tense, breathless vacuum. The moment his last breath was confirmed, a frantic, often bloody race for the throne began. There was no established primogeniture, no clear line of succession beyond the most capable son, This ambiguity, deliberately maintained to allow the fittest to rule, created an immediate, desperate dash for the capital, Istanbul. Every prince in his sanjak would immediately seek the fastest horse, rallying his loyal supporters, attempting to reach the divan and claim the allegiance of the janissaries and the Grand Vizier. This wasn't merely a succession, it was a survival race, a high-stakes gamble where the winner took all and the losers almost certainly lost their lives. The one who reached Istanbul first, secured the support of the army, and had the imperial treasury at his disposal had the strongest claim. The others, if they failed to submit or were perceived as threats, would face the grim reality of the executioner's bowstring. In this struggle, both the strongest and the weakest princes were equally vulnerable. The strongest, with their proven military prowess and popular support, were obvious threats to any brother who seized the throne. Their continued existence was an invitation to rebellion. The weakest, on the other hand, while less of an immediate military danger, were often seen as mere loose ends, potential rallying points for future dissent, or simply unnecessary mouths to feed. They too, therefore, were often eliminated to ensure absolute security for the new sultan. The unspoken rule was brutal: eliminate all potential rivals to consolidate power, ensure stability, and prevent any future challenges. The psychological burden of this law of fratricide was immense. Imagine growing up knowing that your brothers, with whom you shared tutors, games, and sometimes even the same mother, were not just competitors but existential threats. The thought of potentially having to order the execution of your own flesh and blood, or conversely facing execution at their command, would have cast a long, dark shadow over every personal relationship. This constant pressure would undoubtedly warp their perceptions, fostering deep-seated paranoia, distrust, and emotional detachment. Family love became a dangerous sentiment, an Achilles heel in a world where vulnerability meant death. History provides stark and tragic examples of this brutal law in action. The story of Cem Sultan, for instance, is a poignant illustration. After the death of Mehmed the Conqueror, Cem engaged in a fierce struggle with his elder brother, Bayezid II, for the throne. Defeated, Cem sought refuge abroad, becoming a pawn in European politics for years, a perpetual threat to his brother's reign until his eventual death, likely by poisoning, while in papal custody. His story highlights how even a defeated prince could remain a potent political weapon, justifying his brother's persistent desire for his elimination. Another chilling example is Sultan Selim I, Yavuz Sultan Selim, who earned the epithet the Grim for a reason. He systematically eliminated all his brothers and nephews to secure his claim to the throne, ushering in an era of unprecedented Ottoman power, but at an unfathomable human cost within his own family. These are not mere historical anecdotes. They are raw, brutal testaments to the devastating impact of the law of fratricide. The role of Valid sultans and harem women. Beyond the battlefield, in the halls of state, a war of a different kind raged ceaselessly within the opulent, yet claustrophobic confines of the harem. This was the domain of women, a world teeming with ambitious mothers, cunning concubines, and power-hungry relatives, all vying for influence, status, and ultimately the ascension of their sons to the throne. The role of the Valide Sultan, the reigning sultan's mother, was paramount, a figure of immense power and authority who could make or break a prince's fortunes. However, long before a prince's mother became Valide Sultan, she was a concubine, a Haseki Sultan, or simply a woman hoping her son would be the one to inherit. Their competition was not merely for the sultan's affection, but for the very future of their offspring. They were willing to sacrifice anything, to employ every stratagem, to see their sons crowned. The harem was a political arena far more intricate and often deadlier than any divan meeting. Here, the weapons were not swords but whispers, not cannons but cunning. Poisoning was a silent, insidious threat, often attributed to jealous rivals or overly ambitious mothers seeking to eliminate potential claimants to their son's future. Intrigues were woven with meticulous care, gossip carefully planted, and alliances forged and broken with Machiavellian precision. False accusations and slanders could ruin a prince's reputation, turn the sultan against him, or lead to his reassignment to a distant, undesirable sanjak, a form of political exile. The harem was a microcosm of the empire's power struggles, a hothouse where ambition bloomed and treachery festered. The Valide Sultan, once her son ascended the throne, became arguably the most powerful woman in the empire, often exceeding the influence of the Grand Vizier himself. She was not just a mother, she was a political force, managing the immense wealth of the harem, advising her son on matters of state and wielding significant soft power through her network of loyalists and informants. For a prince, having the support of his mother, especially if she eventually became Valida Sultan, was the greatest asset he could possess. She was his staunchest advocate, his most reliable spy, and his last line of defense against the myriad dangers of court. Conversely, an ambitious or ruthless Valida Sultan, whose own son was not the prince in question, could be his greatest threat, using her power and influence to sabotage his chances. Thus, the harem was a constant, simmering cauldron of ambition, where every smile could mask a plot, and every shared confidence could be a prelude to betrayal. Imagine a family gathering where everyone smiles, offers compliments, and expresses profound admiration for your accomplishments, all while secretly plotting your downfall. It's smiling enemies galore. You're being praised for your magnificent horsemanship by an aunt who's probably already paid a stable boy to accidentally swap your saddle for a faulty one. Oh, darling nephew, your poetry is simply divine, coos a distant cousin, whose actual plan involves bribing a palace scribe to misplace your most eloquent letters to your father. The harem was a masterclass in passive-aggressive power plays, a place where genuine affection was a rare commodity, and every interaction was a chess move in a game that could literally cost you your head. Viziers and bureaucrats. Beyond the harem, the Grand Divan, Imperial Council, and the vast network of Ottoman bureaucracy presented another formidable gauntlet for any aspiring prince. The viziers, especially the Grand Vizier, were the Sultan's chief ministers, wielding immense executive power. Their loyalty was a fragile commodity, constantly shifting with the tides of court politics. To whom were they truly beholden? To the reigning sultan, whose power was absolute but transient? Or to the next sultan, the rising sun whose favor would ensure their continued wealth and influence? This created an environment where viziers often played a dangerous double game, outwardly loyal to the current ruler while secretly cultivating relationships with promising princes, hedging their bets for the inevitable change of power. A vizier who misjudged the winds of change could find himself swiftly dismissed, imprisoned, or executed. For a prince, securing the allegiance of a powerful vizier could be a decisive factor in the succession struggle, but trusting that allegiance was a perilous gamble. Bribery and power games were not mere aberrations in the Ottoman court, they were ingrained features of its political landscape. Ambitious viziers and bureaucrats often built vast networks of patronage and corruption, accumulating immense wealth and influence. For a prince to survive, and indeed to thrive, he often had to engage in these dirty games. He needed to understand the intricate web of loyalties and rivalries to know which official could be bribed, which ally could be trusted for a price, and which enemy needed to be neutralized. Navigating these treacherous waters required not only political acumen, but also a cynical pragmatism that belied his age. He had to learn to play the game, even if it meant compromising his own moral compass. The pursuit of power often trumped ethical considerations, turning aspiring rulers into skilled manipulators. Imagine a divan meeting, the heart of the empire's administration, where everyone is ostensibly focused on matters of state. Yet, if you looked closely, you'd see every vizier subtly eyeing his neighbor's turban, wondering if it held a hidden message from a rival prince, or if the man himself was wearing a new, suspiciously expensive silk robe, a recent gift, perhaps? Who made this soup? Even the most innocuous question could trigger a full-blown conspiracy theory. Was it the head chef or a disgruntled servant bribed by a court faction to discredit the Grand Vizier? Every cough, every shift in a seat, every slightly too long glance was analyzed for hidden meaning. Trust was so scarce that even discussing the weather could be interpreted as a coded message about troop movements or tax reforms. The divan was a masterclass in strategic ambiguity, a place where words were weapons and silence could be an even more dangerous game. The constant tension between securing the loyalty of key officials and avoiding being manipulated by them defined a prince's experience. He had to build his own network of spies and informants, not just to watch his brothers, but to keep tabs on the very viziers and bureaucrats who served his father. The shadow play of alliances and betrayals, the quiet exchange of favors for information, the discreet promises made for future support. These were the daily realities of an Ottoman prince's life, turning him into a shrewd, often cynical political operator long before he ever ascended to the throne. Mehmed I and the end of fratricide. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had been haunted by the chilling Nizam-e-Alem principle, a decree that ensured imperial stability through the elimination of all but one royal male heir. This brutal policy, while effective in preventing devastating civil wars, came at an immense human cost, both for the princes themselves and for the moral fabric of the dynasty. However, by the early 17th century, the empire had begun to pay another, perhaps even greater, price for the system: a weakening of the state itself. Constant internal conflicts, even if brief, and the endless intrigues surrounding succession battles were taking a toll. The frequent and often bloody succession struggles, though quickly resolved through fratricide, still caused instability, consumed resources, and bred pervasive fear within the ruling house. More critically, the system inadvertently contributed to the loss of experienced, capable princes who might have otherwise served the empire with distinction. Many promising talents were extinguished prematurely, their potential never realized. It was against this backdrop of pragmatic necessity and evolving imperial dynamics that Sultan Ahmed I ascended to the throne in 1603. Unusually, at the time of his accession, he had no sons. His younger brother Mustafa was still alive, and Ahmed I, either due to personal reluctance to shed his brother's blood, or perhaps swayed by the influence of his consort Kosem Sultan and the growing concerns of the ulema, religious scholars, and powerful viziers regarding the endless bloodshed, made a radical, unprecedented decision. He broke with the centuries-old tradition of fratricide. Instead of executing his brother, he chose to imprison him. This act, driven by a complex mix of personal morality, political calculation, and the pressing need for a stable heir in case he died without issue, laid the groundwork for a revolutionary change in Ottoman succession law, the implementation of the Kafes cage system. The Kafes system fundamentally altered the Ottoman line of succession. No longer would the reigning sultan's eldest son automatically inherit the throne, nor would the fittest son have to fight to the death. Instead, the principle of ekberiyet ve ershediyet, seniority and fitness, was gradually adopted, meaning the eldest and mentally sound male member of the dynasty would inherit the throne. All other potential heirs, so the Sultan's brothers and his own sons, once his children grew up, would henceforth be confined to a designated section of the palace, specifically designed for their isolation. This secluded area, often comprising luxurious apartments but with barred windows and strict supervision, became known as the Kafes. They were provided with every material comfort, but their freedom and their lives were severely restricted. The immediate advantages of this new system were clear. Most importantly, it effectively ended the systematic practice of fratricide, sparing the lives of numerous princes and mitigating the brutal internal strife that had long plagued the dynasty. The empire was spared the trauma and instability of civil wars that often erupted upon a sultan's death. This newfound internal peace allowed for a more orderly transition of power, presenting a more unified front to the world. It preserved the male line of the dynasty, ensuring that a pool of potential heirs always existed, preventing any crisis should a sultan die without mature male offspring. However, the K-phase system came with its own profound, often tragic disadvantages, transforming the lives of princes in a different but equally cruel way. The psychological torture inflicted upon these confined princes was immense. Imagine spending decades in luxurious isolation, knowing you are a prisoner of state, that your future is entirely out of your hands. You could be called to rule at any moment, or you could spend your entire life behind bars, witnessing the world from a barred window. This constant uncertainty, combined with extreme social deprivation, often led to severe mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, madness, and a profound lack of social skills. Many princes, when finally brought to the throne after years, even decades of confinement, were utterly unprepared for the demands of governance. This systemic isolation created a severe disconnect from actual governance. Princes raised in the cafes had no experience managing an army, administering a province, negotiating with foreign dignitaries, or even understanding the complex inner workings of the imperial bureaucracy. Their entire world had been confined to the palace walls, their interactions limited to eunuchs, servants, and the occasional, carefully supervised visitor. When such a prince became sultan, he was often a figurehead, easily manipulated by ambitious viziers, harem women, and court factions. The empire suffered from rulers who lacked practical experience, political acumen, and a true understanding of the vast territories they were meant to govern. Ultimately, the cafes offered a bitter form of survival, but not living in any meaningful sense. These princes were like birds in a golden cage, meticulously cared for, exquisitely fed, but denied the very essence of existence: freedom, purpose, and genuine human connection. They might survive to an old age, but their lives were often hollow, marked by loneliness, fear, and a pervasive sense of futility. They were spared the executioner's bowstring, only to be subjected to a different kind of death: the slow, agonizing demise of their spirit, condemned to a life of perpetual anticipation and unfulfilled potential. Imagine a prince who has spent 30 years in the cafes, suddenly informed he's the new sultan. His first question upon stepping into the bustling divan might genuinely be, "So, what's changed outside? Are we still getting around on horses?" He'd be less concerned about geopolitical alliances and more about whether the street vendors still sold his favorite honeyed almonds. His advisors would likely spend the first few months explaining basic concepts like the economy, foreign policy, and why the janissaries are allowed to leave the palace. His grasp of imperial affairs would be comparable to someone who's only ever seen the world through historical documentaries, suddenly tasked with running a multinational corporation. It was a tragicomic consequence of a system designed to preserve the line, but at the cost of effective leadership. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and Shehzade Mustafa. Among the countless tales of ambition, power, and betrayal within the Ottoman dynasty, few resonate with as much tragic intensity as the story of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and his gifted son, Şehzade Mustafa. Mustafa was the eldest son of Suleiman, born to Mahidevran Sultan and widely regarded as the most promising of his generation. He possessed all the qualities expected of a future sultan. He was a skilled warrior, an accomplished poet, intelligent, popular with the janissaries and the populace, and had proven himself capable in his governorships. He was, by all accounts, destined for greatness. However, Mustafa lived in an era dominated by one of history's most powerful and cunning women, Hürrem Sultan, Suleiman's legal wife and the mother of his younger sons. Hürrem, driven by a fierce desire to see her own sons ascend the throne, masterfully navigated the treacherous waters of court politics. She skillfully undermined Mustafa's position, planting seeds of doubt in Suleiman's mind about his eldest son's loyalty. She used her unparalleled influence over the Sultan, her network of informants, and her considerable intelligence to create a narrative that painted Mustafa as ambitious to the point of disloyalty, implying that he sought to usurp his aging father. The culmination of Hürrem's intrigues and Suleiman's growing paranoia came in 1553 during a campaign against Persia. Mustafa was summoned to his father's imperial tent in Ereğli. Despite warnings from loyalists, Mustafa, confident in his innocence, entered the tent alone. There, he found not his father, but a group of mutes, executioners, waiting. A fierce struggle ensued, but Mustafa was eventually overpowered and strangled to death with a bowstring, on his own father's explicit orders. His death sent shockwaves across the empire, leading to widespread mourning among the janissaries and the people, who saw him as a truly deserving heir. Suleiman, in his old age, later regretted his decision, but the damage was irreversible. Mustafa's fate stands as the most poignant and brutal example of how intra-dynastic intrigue and a father's paranoia could extinguish even the brightest of Ottoman stars, demonstrating the deadly efficacy of the fratricide principle even against a beloved son. Other tragic incidents. While Şehzade Mustafa's story is perhaps the most famous, the annals of Ottoman history are replete with countless other lesser-known but equally heartbreaking tales of princely demise. Many princes, though never reaching Mustafa's level of prominence, met similar ends. Many were strangled by bowstring or silken cord, in keeping with the Ottoman tradition that forbade the shedding of royal blood. This method was applied upon a father's ascension or by a brother seizing the throne. Others, particularly in infancy, might have been victims of subtle foul play within the harem, such as poisoning, where rival mothers sought to diminish the pool of potential claimants without spilling royal blood. While rarer, some princes were also killed in battle or during rebellions, either as leaders or as pawns used by ambitious factions, situations where the strict protocol of bloodless execution could be circumvented by the chaos of war. For example, when Mehmed III ascended the throne in 1595, he famously ordered the execution of his 19 brothers, a chilling testament to the ruthlessness required to secure power. Each death, whether a result of direct execution, alleged poisoning, or battlefield loss, contributed to the pervasive atmosphere of fear and insecurity that defined a prince's life. These tragic events, often overshadowed by the grand narratives of imperial conquest, reveal the profound personal cost of maintaining the Ottoman dynasty's stability. The last words of the princes. Facing death, particularly a forced one, is a terrifying prospect for anyone. For Ottoman princes who lived their entire lives under the shadow of this possibility, their final moments often encapsulate the profound tragedy of their existence. While historical records do not always preserve their exact last words, accounts often describe their pleas for mercy, their defiant assertions of innocence, or their dignified acceptance of an inevitable fate. Some, like Mustafa, fought bravely to the last. Others, like the young sons of Mehmed III, likely died in bewildered terror, too young to comprehend the political necessity of their demise. These final moments would often reflect their understanding of the merciless system that claimed them. Some might have silently cursed the Nizam-e-Alem that sacrificed individual lives for the state. Others might have felt the profound betrayal of a father or brother who condemned them. These were not just deaths, they were symbolic acts, reinforcing the brutal reality of power in the Ottoman Empire. Their final thoughts would have been a chaotic mix of fear, regret, and perhaps a desperate yearning for the life they were never truly allowed to live. To summarize, being an Ottoman prince was to exist in a perpetual state of tension, intrigue, and imminent risk of death. From the moment of birth, cloaked in opulent silks but bound by invisible chains, every breath taken, every decision made, every word uttered was fraught with potential peril. Their lives were a relentless tightrope walk between proving their worth and avoiding the perception of being too great a threat. They grew up in gilded cages where education prepared them for leadership, but also for profound paranoia. Their excursions into the real world as provincial governors were less about genuine freedom and more about navigating a bureaucratic minefield under the constant surveillance of their father's ubiquitous intelligence network. At the heart of it all lay the chilling law of fratricide, a principle that transformed siblings into deadly rivals and made every succession a frantic, often bloody race for survival. Even the later Kafes system, introduced to end fratricide, offered a bittersweet alternative: physical survival at the cost of psychological torment and practical unpreparedness for rule. An Ottoman prince's life was not a fairy tale of luxury and inherited power. It was a brutal existential struggle, a constant battle against the forces that sought to eliminate him, either for the welfare of the state or the ambition of a rival. The tragic saga of the Ottoman princes, while rooted in a specific historical context, offers several poignant universal lessons that transcend time and culture. First, the immense cost of power. Being at the very apex of a vast empire, or even a contender for it, often brought with it an unbearable burden of loneliness and paranoia. The higher one climbed, the fewer genuine allies one found, and the more isolated one became. The immense privilege came hand in hand with an overwhelming fear for one's life, a chilling reminder that ultimate power frequently demands ultimate sacrifice. The golden cage was not just a physical reality, but a metaphor for the psychological isolation that power enforces. Second, the destructive nature of intrafamilial competition. When ambition and survival are pitted against family bonds, the results are almost always catastrophic. The Ottoman example demonstrates how unchecked sibling rivalry, particularly when fueled by the highest stakes imaginable, can tear families apart, leading to acts of unspeakable cruelty. It's a stark reminder that even within the closest units, the pursuit of individual gain can shatter the most fundamental human relationships. Third, the profound impact of systems on the individual. The Ottoman state, in its pursuit of stability and continuity, created a system that demanded the sacrifice of individuals, often innocent ones, for the perceived greater good. Princes were not seen as individuals with rights or aspirations, but as components within a larger machine, to be managed, utilized, or discarded as dictated by the needs of the empire. This illustrates how even well-intentioned, from the state's perspective, systems can dehumanize individuals, forcing them into roles and fates beyond their control. While the specific context of Ottoman succession is long past, the underlying themes resonate strongly with modern concerns. Consider contemporary power struggles in the corporate world, where cutthroat competition for executive positions can mirror the ruthlessness of court intrigue, albeit without the literal threat of strangulation. Or think of family feuds over inheritances, businesses, or legacies, where bitterness and ambition can corrode relationships, turning relatives into adversaries. While the methods have changed, the human drives for power, security, and legacy remain capable of unleashing similar, if less violent, destructive forces. The Ottoman prince's plight reminds us that the human element of ambition and fear often drives complex systems, whether ancient empires or modern corporations. So, the next time you gaze upon the magnificent architecture of an Ottoman palace, or hear the word prince associated with this powerful dynasty, don't just consider the splendor. Remember the profound fear that permeated its gilded halls, the deep-seated paranoia in the eyes of its young heirs, and the ever-present question that loomed over every royal dinner. I wonder if tonight's meal is laced with poison. Because for the Ottoman princes, life was not just about ruling, it was first and foremost a constant struggle for survival. What are your thoughts on this video? Which prince's story resonated with you the most? Share your insights and perspectives in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the fascinating and often brutal chapters of history.